The day a stranger shares their lunch with you might be the day your entire life changes. I didn't believe that kind of thing. Men like me stopped believing in miracles a long time ago. Power teaches you many lessons, but hope is never one of them. That Tuesday afternoon, the October air carried the sharp scent of fallen leaves and distant rain across Central Park. The sky hung low over Manhattan, painted in soft gray, while people hurried along the winding paths without looking at anyone except the glowing screens in their hands. I had spent the entire morning inside a boardroom where million-dollar decisions were made with quiet voices and expensive smiles. Everyone called me Mr. DeLuca. Everyone stood when I entered. Everyone pretended not to fear me, but fear has a scent. You learn to recognize it after enough years. It follows people like expensive perfume. By 3 o'clock, I couldn't breathe inside another luxury office. I told my security team I wanted an hour alone. They protested. They always did. I ignored them. I drove myself across the city in an old SUV nobody would ever associate with Adrian DeLuca. No tailored suit today. No polished Italian shoes. Just faded jeans, worn boots, a weather jacket I had owned since college, and a knit cap pulled low enough to hide my face. The stubble on my jaw completed the disguise. I parked 3 blocks away and walked without destination until I found the oldest oak tree in the park. Its branches stretched over a weathered bench like protective arms. I lowered myself onto the grass beneath it, leaned against the rough bark, closed my eyes, and slowed my breathing. Anyone walking past would see another tired homeless man resting after a difficult morning. Nobody would imagine the newspapers sometimes called me the Invisible King of New York. I wasn't hiding from enemies. I was hiding from expectations. Sometimes I wondered whether anyone could still look at me without wanting something in return. Money. Protection. Influence. Forgiveness. Nobody offered kindness anymore. They negotiated. Even gratitude usually arrived carrying a price tag. Minutes passed. Shoes crunched across dry leaves. Joggers. Office. Workers. Tourists. Parents pushing strollers. Dozens of footsteps. Nobody stopped. A little girl pointed at me before her father gently guided her away. 2 teenagers laughed as they passed. Someone dropped $1 into the grass near my boot without making eye contact. I almost smiled. At least pity still existed. Then everything became strangely quiet. Tiny footsteps approached more slowly than the others. Light. Careful. Curious. They stopped less than 3 feet away. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to sleep, but every instinct sharpened. A small voice whispered, soft enough that only someone pretending not to listen could truly hear it. "Mom! I think this man looks lonely." The little boy could not have been older than 4. I heard the soft rustle of a paper lunch bag before I felt tiny fingers carefully placing something beside my boot. I remained perfectly still, letting my breathing stay slow and even. Years of discipline made pretending effortless, but nothing had prepared me for what happened next. "Mom says everybody gets hungry," the boy whispered, almost like he was sharing an important secret. "If you wake up before I come back, you can have my turkey sandwich." His words settled somewhere deep inside me, in a place I had forgotten still existed. Nobody had ever offered me something without expecting something larger in return. Not in my adult life. A gentle female voice interrupted him before I could let myself think any further. "Noah." There was no anger in her tone, only patient exhaustion. "We should not bother people while they are resting." I heard quick little footsteps shuffle across the leaves instead of retreating. "But Mommy, he does not have a blanket." Silence followed for a heartbeat. Then another. "You have the blue one in your backpack," Noah continued. "Can we let him borrow it?" I expected the mother to say no. Most parents would. New York was expensive. Every dollar mattered. Every belonging mattered even more. Instead, I heard the quiet zipper of a worn backpack opening. "Just for today," she answered softly. "Because nights are getting cold." Something light settled across my shoulders. It smelled like fresh laundry. and baby shampoo. The blanket was small, probably meant for preschool nap time, but she spread it over me as carefully as if I were someone worth protecting. I almost opened my eyes right then. Almost. "Thank you, Mommy," Noah whispered proudly. "Now he will not be cold anymore. Come on, sweetheart. We are already running late. Can I leave him my apple juice too?" She laughed, the kind of tired laugh that came from someone who had forgotten what a full night's sleep felt like. "If you do, you will not have anything for after preschool." Noah thought about that for several long seconds. I could practically hear his tiny mind weighing impossible decisions. Then the paper bag crinkled again. "He needs it more than me." The bottle was placed gently beside the sandwich. I swallowed hard, surprised by the tightness in my throat. Expensive whiskey had been gifted to me. Rare watches. Handcrafted Italian suits. Limited edition sports cars. None of them had ever carried the weight of one child's lunch. "You have the biggest heart," his mother whispered. "I hope you never lose it." Their footsteps slowly faded toward the east path, mixing with distant bicycle bells and birds singing somewhere high in the branches above. Only then did I open my eyes. The sandwich was wrapped in wax paper decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. The small bottle of apple juice still felt cool from the morning. The blanket covered only half my body, yet somehow it warmed me more than the cashmere coats hanging inside my penthouse closet ever had. I picked up the lunch bag and noticed a crooked smiley face drawn in blue crayon with shaky little hands. Underneath it, in uneven letters, was a message that stole every remaining excuse I had for believing kindness no longer existed. It simply read, "Have a better day. Love, Noah." I sat there long after Emily and Noah disappeared into the afternoon crowd, turning the little paper bag over in my hands as though it contained something far more valuable than a simple lunch. The blue crayon smiley face looked uneven, imperfect, unmistakably drawn by a child who believed happiness should be shared whenever possible. I had negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I had signed documents that changed skylines across Manhattan. Yet somehow, the only thing I could think about was the careful way Emily had spread that tiny blanket across a complete stranger without asking who he was or whether he deserved her kindness. Most people avoided inconvenience whenever they could. She had chosen compassion even though exhaustion weighed every word she spoke. I finally stood, folded Noah's blanket with the same care it had been given, and looked toward the path where they had vanished. My phone vibrated inside my jacket almost immediately. Only 3 people possessed that private number. I answered without speaking. "Sir," Vincent said calmly, "you have been alone for 53 minutes. My team would appreciate knowing you are still alive." A faint smile crossed my face before disappearing just as quickly. "I am fine. Should we pick you up?" I looked once more at the sandwich wrapped in dinosaur paper. "Not yet." Vincent hesitated. He had worked beside me for nearly 12 years. He knew the difference between my short answers and my thoughtful ones. "Is something wrong?" "No," I replied quietly. "Something is different." I ended the call before he could ask another question. Instead of driving back downtown, I crossed the park toward a nearby coffee stand. The young cashier greeted me with the practiced smile people reserve for customers they expect will leave quickly. I purchased 2 hot coffees and several fresh pastries before walking back to the oak tree. The dollar someone had tossed beside my boot earlier still rested in the grass. I picked it up, slipped it into my wallet beside a photograph of my late mother, and left the coffees and pastries on the bench with a handwritten note. For whoever needs them most. It felt strangely insignificant compared to what Noah had done. Money had always been the easiest thing for me to give. Time and genuine attention were infinitely more expensive. As I reached my vehicle, I paused before opening the driver's door. "Vincent," I said after calling him back. "I need information." His tone immediately shifted into business. "On whom?" "A woman named Emily. Blonde hair. Late 20s. She has a 4-year-old son named Noah. She was carrying a faded green backpack and works somewhere close enough to walk through Central Park every weekday around 3 in the afternoon. There was a brief silence. Do you have a last name? No. An address? No. Did she ask for help? I stared through the windshield at children laughing near the playground. She did not ask for anything. Then why do you want us to find her? My fingers tightened around the little blue blanket resting on the passenger seat. Because people like her disappear every day, I answered softly. And somehow I cannot stop thinking that the world would become a much colder place if someone ever stopped protecting the ones who still choose kindness first. Vincent remained quiet for several seconds before responding. I will have everything by tonight. As I started the engine, I realized something that unsettled me more than any business rival ever had. For the first time in years, I was not chasing an opportunity. I was searching for the owner of a child's extraordinary heart. By 8 that evening, Vincent walked into my private office carrying a slim black folder instead of the usual tablet. That alone told me everything inside had been verified twice. He placed it quietly on the walnut desk before taking his customary step backward. You were right, he said. She is exactly who she appeared to be. I opened the folder slowly. The first photograph showed Emily Carter leaving a narrow brick apartment building in Queens just after 6 that morning. She wore the same faded green backpack, a gray jacket with one loose button, and comfortable sneakers that had clearly seen better days. Noah walked beside her holding her hand with one hand and a stuffed brown rabbit with the other. The rabbit had one ear stitched back together with blue thread. I found myself staring at that tiny detail longer than I expected. Go on, I said quietly. Vincent nodded. Emily is 29 years old. She has been raising Noah alone since he was born. She works 3 jobs. Morning housekeeping at the Westbrook estate in Manhattan, afternoon cleaning offices, and weekend laundry service at a retirement community. She has never missed a rent payment, although she has come dangerously close more than once. I turned another page. Utility bills. School enrollment forms. Grocery receipts. Nothing unusual. Nothing hidden. Just an ordinary life balanced carefully on determination. Any criminal history? Vincent almost looked offended by the question. None. Parking ticket 5 years ago. Paid within 48 hours. I continued reading. Noah attended a neighborhood preschool 3 mornings each week. Emily volunteered there once a month because she could not afford every activity fee. She borrowed library books instead of buying children's books. She repaired Noah's clothes herself. She donated blood twice a year for grocery gift cards that she quietly used to purchase extra food for an elderly neighbor in her building. I leaned back in my chair. She gave away part of what she barely had. Vincent folded his hands. There is more. He handed me several printed photographs taken by our investigators earlier that afternoon. Emily had stopped outside a bakery just before closing. Instead of purchasing fresh bread, she waited until the owner placed discounted day-old loaves on a small shelf near the register. She thanked him with a smile that looked completely genuine. In another photograph, Noah was laughing while balancing on the sidewalk curb, pretending it was a pirate ship. Emily laughed with him as though the cracked concrete were the happiest place on earth. She never complains. Vincent continued. Every person we quietly spoke with described the same woman. Hardworking. Honest. Kind. She helps everyone without expecting anything in return. I closed the folder and stared out at the Manhattan skyline glowing beneath thousands of lights. From my office on the 42nd floor, the city looked untouchable, almost perfect. But somewhere down there, a woman who owned almost nothing was somehow making it warmer for everyone around her. There is one concern, Vincent finally added. His voice became noticeably more serious. Her employer. I looked back at him immediately. He slid one final page across the desk. The heading displayed the name Westbrook Estate. Beneath it were several complaints from former employees, all quietly settled without legal action. High turnover. Missing wages. False accusations. Sudden dismissals. No criminal findings, but enough patterns to make experienced investigators uneasy. My eyes settled on one handwritten statement from a former housekeeper. I was blamed for something I did not do because I had nobody important to defend me. I read the sentence twice before closing the file. Outside my office window, the city continued shining as if nothing were wrong. Inside, a feeling I had not experienced in years settled heavily in my chest. It was not suspicion. It was certainty. Somewhere very soon, Emily Carter was going to need someone to stand beside her, even though she would probably never think to ask. The following morning, I found myself checking the clock far more often than I cared to admit. At exactly 9:15, Vincent's daily report arrived. Emily had already finished cleaning 6 guest rooms at the Westbrook estate before most of the family had even come downstairs for breakfast. She moved quietly through hallways lined with priceless paintings and crystal chandeliers, polishing surfaces that reflected a lifestyle she would probably never experience herself. The security photographs showed the same gentle expression she had worn in the park. She greeted every employee by name. She smiled at the gardeners. She thanked the cook for wrapping yesterday's leftover rolls so she could take them home instead of letting them go to waste. There was no resentment in her face. No envy. Just quiet determination. Around noon, another message appeared on my phone. Vincent never called unless something had changed. "You should see this yourself," he said. 20 minutes later, I parked across the street from the estate in another unremarkable vehicle. From where I sat, I could see the service entrance through partially opened iron gates. Employees came and went carrying supplies, laundry baskets, and boxes. Emily stepped outside holding 2 trash bags, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear as the autumn wind swept across the driveway. Before she could return inside, an older woman wearing an expensive navy suit blocked her path. Even from a distance, I recognized authority in the woman's posture. This had to be the estate manager. Their conversation began quietly, but Emily's shoulders slowly stiffened. She shook her head once. Then again. The manager raised a leather notebook and pointed toward the mansion with sharp, impatient movements. Emily tried to explain something, keeping her voice calm. She even reached into her apron pocket as though searching for proof of whatever she was saying. It did not matter. The manager folded her arms and turned away without another glance. Emily remained standing alone for several seconds before taking a slow breath and walking back inside. She never raised her voice. She never argued. She simply carried her disappointment the same way she carried everything else, silently. "Our investigator inside the staff says the owner's diamond bracelet cannot be found," Vincent explained through my earpiece. "They are questioning everyone." My stomach tightened. "Has anything been discovered?" "Not yet. But the manager has already decided who she believes is responsible." I already knew the answer before he said the name. "Emily." "Yes." I watched another employee leave the service entrance wiping nervous hands on her uniform. A delivery driver climbed into his truck without making eye contact with anyone. The entire estate seemed heavier somehow, as though tension had settled over every brick and window. "There is something else," Vincent continued. "If she loses this job, her income drops below the minimum required in her apartment lease renewal. She could lose the apartment within 60 days. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. 60 days. One accusation? One missing bracelet. A lifetime built on sacrifice suddenly balanced on something she could not control. My phone buzzed again with a photograph from inside the mansion. Emily stood beside a long dining table while another employee searched through her cleaning cart. Noah's blue lunch bag hung from one handle, waiting for preschool pickup later that afternoon. Seeing that familiar little bag made something inside me shift from concern into resolve. I slipped the folded blue blanket from my briefcase, running my fingers across the tiny stitched corner where Noah's initials had been sewn by hand. "Vincent," I said quietly, never taking my eyes off the mansion. "Keep watching. Do not interfere unless she is truly cornered." "Understood. Because when I walk through those gates," I continued, starting the engine, "I want the truth to be ready before anyone has the chance to bury it." The estate's front doors opened with quiet elegance as I stepped inside wearing the same tailored charcoal suit the business world expected from Adrian DeLuca. Conversation stopped one by one, not because anyone announced my arrival, but because recognition traveled faster than words. The house manager's confident expression disappeared the moment she saw me crossing the marble floor. "Mr. DeLuca," she said quickly, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. "What an unexpected honor!" I returned a polite nod. I was in the neighborhood. It was an obvious lie, but nobody challenged it. People rarely questioned someone they believed always had a reason for appearing. My gaze drifted naturally across the grand foyer until it settled on Emily. She stood near the staircase beside her cleaning cart, both hands folded tightly in front of her apron. Her face remained composed, yet the exhaustion beneath her eyes seemed deeper than it had only 24 hours earlier. She looked at me the same way everyone else did, as a stranger of influence. She had no idea we had already met beneath an old oak tree. "We are terribly sorry for the inconvenience," the manager continued. "One of our employees is assisting us with a routine internal matter." Emily opened her mouth as though to speak, then quietly lowered her eyes again. That simple movement bothered me more than raised voices ever could. Honest people often believed dignity meant remaining calm, even when nobody believed them. "Routine matters deserve careful attention," I replied evenly. "Especially when they involve someone's reputation." A middle-aged man wearing an expensive watch stepped forward from the library. "Richard Westbrook, owner of the estate." He extended his hand confidently. "Adrian, it has been too long. I apologize for the distraction. A family bracelet has gone missing. We are simply eliminating possibilities." I accepted the handshake without looking away from Emily. "Have you found it?" "Not yet." "Then you have possibilities," I answered calmly. "Not conclusions." An uncomfortable silence settled across the room. Before anyone could respond, Vincent entered carrying a slim envelope. He walked directly to me, placed it into my hand, and stepped back without a word. I opened it slowly. Inside were still photographs collected from the estate's own security system. "Interesting," I said softly. Richard frowned. "What is it?" I laid the photographs across the polished entry table one by one. The first showed Emily beginning her shift with an empty cleaning cart. The second showed another employee entering the owner's private sitting room 37 minutes later after Emily had already left that floor. The third displayed the same employee carrying an unusually large laundry basket toward the service elevator. The final image showed the missing bracelet resting beneath folded towels inside a linen cabinet nearly an hour after Emily had finished cleaning the room. Nobody spoke. The manager's face turned pale. Richard looked from one photograph to the next before slowly removing his glasses. "Where did you get these?" he asked quietly. "Your own security cameras," Vincent answered. "Your archived recordings had not yet been reviewed in chronological order." Richard stared at Emily for several long seconds before taking a slow breath. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice noticeably softer now, "it appears we reached the wrong conclusion." Emily blinked as though she had not expected those words to exist. I only wanted to finish my work," she whispered. "I understand." Richard turned toward the manager, disappointment replacing irritation. "Restore her schedule immediately. And make certain every employee understands that assumptions are not evidence." Around us, shoulders relaxed. The tension that had filled the estate all afternoon quietly dissolved. Emily looked toward me with grateful but confused eyes. She smiled politely, the same gentle smile she had offered a stranger beneath an oak tree, never realizing she had already changed his life before he ever walked through her employer's front door. Richard Westbrook kept his word. Before I reached the front doors, every employee had been gathered in the main hall. He apologized publicly for allowing suspicion to replace fairness, and announced that every future investigation would require verified evidence before anyone's name was questioned again. The manager who had accused Emily lowered her head and quietly accepted responsibility. There were no dramatic arguments, no raised voices, only the uncomfortable silence that follows an undeniable truth. Sometimes accountability speaks loudest when nobody has anything left to say. I watched from the marble staircase for another minute before leaving without introducing myself. That had never been the reason I came. Outside, the crisp afternoon air felt lighter than it had earlier. Vincent fell into step beside me as we crossed the long stone driveway toward my car. "Everything has been corrected," he said. "The false report has been removed from her employee file. She will also receive back pay for today's interruption." I nodded but kept looking toward the service entrance. Emily emerged several minutes later carrying the same faded green backpack over one shoulder. She looked exhausted, yet she still stopped to hold the gate open for an elderly groundskeeper pushing a heavy cart. The old man smiled. She smiled back. It was such a small moment that most people would never notice it. I could not stop noticing. Kindness seemed to follow her naturally, even after one of the most difficult afternoons of her life. "Do you want us to tell her?" Vincent asked. "Tell her what?" "That you were the reason we reviewed the security footage. She deserves to know." I shook my head immediately. "No. She will probably spend years wondering why a man like you appeared exactly when she needed help." I watched Emily disappear down the sidewalk toward the subway station. "Then let her believe today restored her faith in fairness, not in me." Vincent studied my expression without speaking. He had seen me negotiate impossible business deals. He had watched me remain calm under pressure that would have broken most people. Yet this was different. I was protecting something far more fragile than a financial empire. I was protecting the purity of a child's kindness. If Emily ever learned the truth, she might wonder whether leaving that sandwich beneath the oak tree had somehow obligated me to help her. I could never allow that. Noah had not shared his lunch because he expected a reward. Emily had covered a stranger with her son's blanket because compassion was simply part of who she was. Those gifts had to remain exactly what they were. Free. Unconditional. We drove away in silence. As Manhattan's skyline filled the windshield, my thoughts drifted back to the small blue blanket folded carefully inside my briefcase. I had planned to return it anonymously once I found the right opportunity. Until then, it stayed with me like a quiet reminder that strength and gentleness could exist together. The following afternoon, just before 3 o'clock, I parked near the same stretch of Central Park where everything had begun. The oak tree stood exactly as I remembered, its golden leaves dancing in the cool breeze. I stepped out of the car carrying the neatly folded blanket beneath one arm. For the first time in years, I was early for something that had nothing to do with business. I leaned against the old tree and looked toward the familiar walking path, wondering if fate ever repeated itself. A few moments later, I heard laughter floating through the autumn air before I saw them. Then a tiny voice filled the park with joyful certainty. "Mommy, look! Tree Uncle came back!" Noah broke away before Emily could reach for his hand. His little sneakers scattered dry leaves across the path as he ran straight toward me with the fearless confidence only a child could possess. "Tree Uncle!" he shouted again, smiling so brightly that several people nearby turned to look. I found myself smiling before I even realized it. It happened naturally, without calculation, without effort. I knelt just as he reached me, and an instant later his tiny arms wrapped around my neck as though we had known each other for years instead of sharing only one quiet afternoon. "You came back," he announced proudly. "I knew you would." I laughed softly. The sound surprised me as much as it surprised Vincent, who stood several yards away pretending to admire the trees while discreetly giving us privacy. "I did," I replied. "And I think something belongs to you." I unfolded the small blue blanket with both hands. Noah's eyes grew wide with excitement. "Mommy! He kept it safe!" Emily finally caught up, slightly out of breath. She looked from Noah to me and then to the blanket, confusion gently replacing concern. "You were the gentleman in the park?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "I wanted to return this personally." Her cheeks turned faintly pink. "You really did not have to. It was only a child's blanket." I looked down at the carefully stitched blue initials in one corner before meeting her eyes again. I think it was much more than that. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. The breeze carried golden leaves around our feet, while distant laughter drifted from the playground across the lawn. Noah had already spread the blanket on the grass and was proudly arranging imaginary teacups for a picnic with his stuffed rabbit. Emily watched him with the soft expression of a mother who measured success not by money but by moments like this. "I am glad you are doing better," she finally said. "You looked like you had the weight of the world on your shoulders that day." I almost answered with the truth. That I had carried responsibilities heavy enough to fill entire buildings. That every decision I made affected thousands of lives. That loneliness had become so familiar I no longer noticed it until her son interrupted it with a sandwich wrapped in dinosaur paper. Instead, I simply smiled. "I think I met the right people at the right time." She returned the smile, completely unaware of how much those simple words meant. Noah looked up suddenly. "Mommy, can Tree Uncle have lunch with us?" Emily laughed softly. "Sweetheart, I am sure he has important places to be." Before I could answer, Noah shook his head with complete confidence. "Important people still have to eat." I felt another unexpected laugh escape my chest. It had been years since anyone challenged my schedule with such innocent certainty. "Actually," I admitted, loosening my tie for what felt like the first time in forever, "I think your son is right." Emily hesitated only for a moment before opening her backpack. She removed 3 homemade peanut butter and jelly sandwiches wrapped neatly in wax paper. "They are not exactly gourmet," she said with an embarrassed smile. "Those happen to be my favorite kind," I answered honestly. We sat together beneath the same oak tree where everything had quietly begun. Noah told me long stories about preschool, dinosaurs, and how squirrels were secretly training to become superheroes. Emily apologized each time he exaggerated, but I found myself listening more carefully than I had listened during any board meeting that year. Across the lawn, Vincent lowered his sunglasses just enough to hide the smile forming on his face. He had known me for over a decade, yet he had never once seen me sitting cross-legged on a child's blanket sharing peanut butter sandwiches beneath an old tree. Neither had I. That afternoon stayed with me long after the sandwiches were gone and the sun disappeared behind the Manhattan skyline. I had built my entire life around the belief that every problem could be solved with enough influence, enough planning, enough control. Yet none of those things had reached me the way one small family had. Over the following weeks, seeing Emily and Noah beneath the old oak tree quietly became the part of my day I protected more fiercely than any meeting on my calendar. Some afternoons we shared coffee while Noah chased squirrels across the grass. Other days we simply watched people pass by, talking about ordinary things that somehow felt extraordinary because nobody wanted anything from me except my company. Emily never asked what I did for a living beyond saying I always looked busy. I never lied to her, but I never volunteered the full truth either. For the first time in years, I wanted someone to know me before they knew my name. One chilly Friday evening, Noah climbed onto the park bench beside me holding his stuffed rabbit against his chest. "Tree Uncle," he whispered. "Mom says good people help when they can, even if nobody ever finds out." I looked toward Emily, who was packing their backpack a few yards away. She smiled without realizing I had heard her lesson. That simple sentence explained everything about the woman she was raising him to become. A week later, Richard Westbrook invited me to dinner as a thank you for helping uncover the truth at his estate. During the meal he mentioned that Emily had been promoted to supervise the housekeeping staff after everyone witnessed her honesty and professionalism. He also told me the estate had quietly created a scholarship fund that would cover Noah's education through high school. Emily believed the family had started it to support employees with children. She never learned who suggested the idea. I asked Richard to keep it that way. Some gifts lose their meaning the moment they become advertisements. Winter arrived slowly, dusting the branches of the old oak tree with the season's first snow. Noah laughed as he tried to catch snowflakes on his mittens while Emily wrapped his scarf tighter around his neck. I finally realized something I had spent years searching for in boardrooms, luxury towers, and endless success. Peace had never been waiting at the top of the mountain I kept climbing. It had been sitting quietly beneath a tree beside two people who chose kindness before convenience every single day. On Christmas Eve, I handed Noah a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a brand new stuffed rabbit that looked almost identical to the worn one he loved so much. He smiled politely, hugged the new toy for exactly 3 seconds, then placed it beside him before picking up the old patched rabbit again. "This one still needs me," he explained. Emily laughed softly while I felt my throat tighten once more. Children have a remarkable way of reminding adults what loyalty actually looks like. As we stood beneath the glowing park lights, Emily looked at me with the same gentle smile she had offered a stranger months earlier. "I think you have been happier lately," she said. I looked toward the oak tree where a tiny blue blanket had once rested across my shoulders. "That is because someone reminded me that the richest people are not the ones who own the most," I answered quietly. "They are the ones who still know how to give without counting the cost." She nodded as though the idea was perfectly ordinary. Maybe for her, it always had been. Watching Noah run ahead through the fresh snow, I finally understood the truth I had missed for far too long. My reputation had earned respect. My success had earned influence. But a little boy with a sandwich, a blanket, and an open heart had given me something neither money nor power could ever buy. He reminded me how to become human again.